David Weeks is my guest on our podcast this week. In two parts, he is going to tell his story about the abuse that started for him at age 4 when he was abandoned, suffered extreme neglect by a narcissistic mother, physical, verbal abuse by a stepfather, and then sexual assault from the age of 13 when he was looking for love in all the wrong places, as he puts it, not knowing what it was since he had never experienced it, and finds out that the 39-year-old that he's communicating with online actually lives just down the street. That first rape and assault led to many, many more as he was trafficked. I found him to be remarkable, and I can't wait for you to hear his story, feel his courage, and to learn what he's doing now to try and help others tell their stories. Here's David. I am so grateful that David Weeks is joining us today to share his personal story. I know that this is not the easiest thing for a person to do, especially still a young man, still trying to recover from the trauma and the abuse that he suffered. David, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me. It's truly a gift.
Well, I appreciate that. I hope that our listeners know that the courage it takes to share your story so truthfully and honestly, like you are about to do, is something that I believe can help millions of other people, truly, when they hear someone else saying their story out loud and they realize the connections that are there to their own story. There is great healing, and there's also this sense of possibility, like maybe I can get past what's happened to me because he's sharing his story, he's telling his truth and all of the truth, which is what you are so generously doing today on this podcast and on our show. So, as we start, I just wanted to make sure that you know that I am so sorry for what happened to you and for what you have suffered through many, many years. And just starting this conversation with you, I want you to start where you feel most comfortable. And of course, as always, you say and tell us what you feel comfortable saying and telling us. But we are very real, and we know that the truth is is hard to hear sometimes, but it's necessary for the awareness and the prevention that we want to have happen in the world of sexual
Definitely.
trials, abuse, and grooming. Yes. So
Um, yeah, well, thank you so much for having me again. It's truly a gift to be able to share my story and be seen for the first time in a very long time. I also wanted to say to the listeners who are listening to this, if you relate to any of this, I'm so sorry because no one should have to relate to this. And if you do, I see you, I hear you, and I love you so much. Those are words I needed to hear for a very long time, so I wanna give that to someone who needs to hear it.
I
Um,
think that's beautiful because there are a lot of people who don't feel loved because the abuse started, right in the place that should have had the most love and the most safety, and that's not what they experienced in their home. And I know that that's the case with you, and you were very young. Can you start right around that age 4 and how your life, if you remember before age 4 or what happened right then that
yeah.
started this path and this journey?
Um, so when I was about the age of 4, the first memory I have is I was in the car with my father, my biological father, and I remember the color of the car like, it's as if it was yesterday. It was a black SUV with my sister in it, and I started crying for whatever reason. So he takes, me back to the house and tells my mom I can't deal with him anymore. And I just thought, am I too much? Like, what did I do? Did I do something wrong? And I just felt truly abandoned. And I just sat on the couch and, drank my warm strawberry milk, which I always had to have, and just listened to my mom and grandma have this very intense conversation that I can't really remember. I just knew to stay silent and, I think I survived a lot by staying silent and not being seen because to be seen was to cause noise and cause trouble.
And that always had consequences when you were seen and you were heard.
Yes,
So,
all the
becoming
time,
silent.
all the time. It almost became like you lose your identity when you're abused at such a young age. People who go through developmental trauma, it's its own form of trauma because it robs someone's sense of self, and they don't know how to self individualize, make decisions for themselves. Their sense of intimacy skewed for the rest of their life, and it sets them on a path that is so much harder to navigate than if they had loving parents who brought them into the world and loved them for who they were and who they are. So that's where I wanted to start the age of 4 because that's kind of where I remember the
First
kind
memory of being
first
abandoned,
memory.
being, "I can't handle you," sitting on the couch, mom and grandma are having an intense conversation. You knew it was probably about you and it lives in your body, the trauma, even if you don't remember the specific words. And you felt it because we feel that kind of trauma and that kind of energy, like something's wrong. And immediately at 4 years old, not even knowing the words, all of a sudden you were probably riddled and filled with shame. Something's wrong with me. And that's how we start on the world of trauma that was to follow for you. So, what happened during those couple of years after that experience? Was dad in your life anymore, or was he completely gone? And what happened next for your mother?
So when I say father, I mean my biological father, and then when I say stepfather, I mean my stepfather. So my father left my mom around the age of 4, and the divorce was finalized when I was about 4 years old. And then my mom started seeing my stepfather. I just remember my memories of him, and when the wedding happened was pretty fast. They got married when I was 6, so I don't know how long they started dating, but every time I was around my stepfather, I always just felt this intense energy of something evil, and it just didn't sit well with me at all. We never connected ever, and it's like my body knew that this is a bad person. So he came into our lives, and, very soon after, he won deployment because he was in the military, he was in the Navy, and he was gone for some bit of time. So my mom didn't really have a man to attach to. She attached to me. I became almost her boyfriend, the way I look at it, where we would go on these special dates and do these things that my other sisters wouldn't do. And, she would cuddle me all night. And like the more I just like thought about it as I got older, the more it just made me feel icky because I was like, why am I receiving this treatment, but my sisters are?
Right. And
Um,
so you knew there was some kind of, without knowing in a 6 year old's mind exactly what was happening, you couldn't describe it in words, but all you needed to know really is that you felt icky. You
yeah,
know, our intuition and those things, those feelings we have are real. And that something was wrong with that, that it didn't feel right.
I even remember like we were like cuddling one night, and I just like, remember like I don't feel like her son. I just feel like something more than her son. Um, and at times, it felt good being special. I think anytime when someone is put on a pedestal, it feels really good, no matter what age you are.
True. Mm.
So, but unfortunately, the fall is a long way down, and pedestals eventually do collapse. And it certainly did for me. My stepfather came back from deployment, and I was immediately discarded. I was not seeing the same lens as I was before he was here, and
So you're talking with your mother all of a sudden discarded by her. Like
Yes,
he's back, now you're not looked at the same way.
exactly. Um, like, our dinner dates started disappearing more. Her time started being filled more with his what he wanted to do. We stopped kind of cohesively acting as a family. So we stopped watching TV shows because it irritated him. So we had to watch certain things. It was very controlling, as if, we were in the military and, you don't really treat small children as cadets because we're not cadets. We are children. It very much affected my sense of self, feeling safe in the world. Um, if I would get in trouble for like the slightest infractions, I would do. And if I cried, I got in more trouble. So I learned, not to show emotion. And even to this day, it's very hard for me to cry in front of someone because I'm just so trained not to. And, I don't know if that's cultural because, men are socialized not to show emotion. But certainly for me, anytime I like showed it I was in distress or whatnot, I would just get more in trouble. So, um,
Yeah, so being treated in that way, it's just driving home the socialization that, boys don't cry, and not only that, stand at attention basically and do everything I say and never talk back and don't have a voice, and your identity that was tied up with your mother in some of those good ways that felt good and then felt icky all at once, same, kind of in the same moment. Now all of a sudden she's disconnected from you as well. And you had described your mother to me in a pre-interview as being a narcissist. Could you
yes.
explain what that means to you and how you came to that assessment as an adult looking back on her?
After college, I eventually met a terrific woman, Dr. Ramani, and opened my whole world up to all kinds of things. And
She is terrific.
she's truly has a gift, and the world is definitely better with her in it. I found the word narcissist, and it just it felt like things just came into color again. I was like, "This isn't my fault. This is my parents' fault." And I was abused by parents who and suffered narcissistic abuse for over 2 decades. And realizing that was, like, the most freeing thing ever, because for so long, I was like, "This is my fault. I am less than. I should have done more. I should have, cleaned my room more. I should have, you know, not get in trouble as much, be better as any possible." And it finally broke me from those chains that, no, this is on her. She made a decision. She had children, and it was her responsibility to take care of us, and she failed, and she has to live with that.
It's
So
just interesting how often when we just can put a name on something, when we can understand that there's a name, all of a sudden it does change our perception. It does bring the color back into your world like, "Oh, this is something someone did to me. This is not like there was something wrong with me." And we'll get to your, the other side of how you've begun to heal later on, maybe in part two. But I wanted to go back and just know
yeah,
how you realized that your mother was a narcissist, like you had described to me,
yeah.
and some of the things that she did that looking back, you're like, "Oh, that's narcissistic behavior."
I always knew something was off about the family. I just didn't know what. Like, I'm just like, this can't be normal. Like, something's wrong here. I just didn't have the word for it. And so
Mhm.
because of that, I blamed myself. And I think having a framework for something can really help you put the picture in it,
Oh, yeah. Definitely.
because it's almost like, walking on a tightrope without it. You're just like, I don't know what is up. I don't know what is down. I'm just kind of walking and surviving. But my mom is very much a vulnerable, covert narcissist. She used manipulation and control as her weapon. My mom is someone who is very much two different people, as in public, she is this caring, charismatic, charming person, but behind closed doors, she is rageful, manipulative, gaslighting, and invalidating. And so it confused me a lot because she would be nice to me around her friends, but when we were alone, like, I didn't get that. So it just reinforced to me that, I wasn't enough, that something must be my fault. And then, the gaslighting of, her telling me that didn't happen, you're crazy, you need more therapy, um, no one loves you, you need me more than I need you. It really messed me up a lot and caused me to, you know, not show needs because if I had a need that was outside of hers, it never ended well. And my self confidence was completely shattered because every time I felt confident in myself, she would see that and just tear it all down and saying, like, get off your high horse. No one cares about you. And to this day, it's so hard for me to feel comfortable within myself sometimes. And my stepfather was very much a malignant narcissist with some psychopathy in them. I've never seen him cry once in my life. Um, and I don't know if he truly feels emotions the way other people do.
So how did he act towards you, and use that with your mom? Because I know that you said you felt like you were weaponized.
Yes.
Tell me
So,
about
like,
what that means to you or what happened.
yes. So, what happened was, there was a period of time where my stepfather was decent to me, but I feel like it was more of a show. My mom, like, look, I'm next to your kids, and that won her over. Um, but it was never. It was all pretend. Um, he very much tried to separate me and my mom. I would say me and my mom had a very close bond, and for a while, she was my world. And she really did pin us to, pin us against each other and saying you're enabling the kids. You are allowing the kids to act this way. Again, very militaristic, and it. I just knew he was evil. Like, that's the words I had for him. And, um, like, one instance, it was Valentine's Day, and, um, my mom was raging at me, and I tossed the card to her while she was laying down, and she accused me of throwing it at her. So, I got in trouble. Went to my room. I was sitting in front of my, DS, so, a game, and just, like, being in the imagination space of, like, what would I be doing if I was playing it? And, I was a a huge rule follower growing up, so, like, I knew not to pick the DS up. I just went and, just sat in front of it, and my stepfather came in and saw me next to it and accused me of playing it. And I told him, "No, like, you can look at the history, like, the DS was never on." And he said, "I don't believe you." And, you know, it's the first time I've ever felt not believed by my mom, um, saying, like, "I thought, like, you were the good child." And, like, it.
That wasn't allowed and you were sitting in front of it, not playing it, but as
Yes,
soon as he made the accusation, mom agreed. Now you're, you know, a bad boy, a bad
yes,
child.
yes. And I remember, like, we had this huge trampoline in the backyard, and I was jumping on it once with my family up on the deck, just telling myself, I haven't gotten in trouble for a while. I must be doing something right. And because every day was like walking on unexploded bombs, not knowing what would set them off, and having to anticipate their every emotion. So I am an empath. I have heightened empathy, and I have always been able to read people a little bit better, which I think has helped me survive childhood. Um, but like at the age of 6, I was able to therapize my mom. And she would excuse herself from dinner and she would say, I'm going to the bathroom, but I knew that was key for I'm gonna go in my bed and cry because my husband is away and not here. And so I would follow her and tell her, it's okay, he'll be back, he still loves you, everything's gonna be fine. And I was doing this at the age of 6. So um I was very in tune to my environment at a very early age.
And also providing what an adult should be providing for you, the child, you were providing that for your mother.
Yes.
And weren't you sick growing up? Didn't you have sort of
Yes.
health issues?
I was very, very sick. My mom, from what I was told, she was having a miscarriage with me. And, I don't know if that contributed to the health problems I had, but I had a very, very bad epilepsy growing up. And the longest seizure I had was 8 minutes long in kindergarten. Um, it's very long. I think the average seizure is like 30 seconds to a minute. So for
Mhm.
8 minutes, pretty long. Um, so I was in and out of the hospital a lot. I can't think of the term right now, but it's, not an EKG, but basically they shave your head and wrap a bunch of wires on your head and test the brain waves in your head. And I had to wear that for 2 days so they could see, like, the brain patterns in my head. And, again, I felt very different. I was this kid who had, like, 1,000 wires coming from my head, wrapped up in bandages with a backpack next to me, looking like an alien that just landed from Mars or something. And so I felt very, different. I would, have to miss out on things that other kids got to go to. Um, and so, like, yeah, I was very, very sick as a kid.
And with the, kind of the military sort of abuse, that kind of corporal punishment and never being able to just, free form as a kid. Sounds like you had a lot of rules. And then that emotional abuse and the isolation that you were going through, along with that epilepsy, I'm sure that all of those things made you feel even more alone and isolated, and even though you were trying to comfort your mom when the stepdad's gone, all of those things, you're not equipped to do that as a 6-year-old.
Yeah.
You are in need of safety. And what happened with, as you grew into your 7, I believe it was around age 7, you said something significant happened at that age?
Yes. So, um, there was there was a huge custody battle between my mom and my father, and, um, I could no longer call my father dad. I had to call him Jim, his first name, and I had to call my stepfather dad. So I didn't get to make that decision. That decision was made for me, and of course, I would tell my, father, I would say like, "Hi, Jim." And he would be like, "That's so disrespectful, like, I'm your father." And so I would get yelled at him. So I eventually just, like, made it up and just, said, "I'll call one person dad, the other person daddy." And eventually, that worked, because, they're both being called dad. And so, it was very much being a chameleon growing up, being able to adapt. Um, I had to spend the weekends with my father, and I spent the week with my mom. And a lot of the times I did feel like property, like, "Oh, you get him during the weekend, and I get him." during the week, and we'll just, swap back and forth. And, the ch family courts are not there to protect the child. They're there to protect the rights of the parents and making sure their rights are followed. And oftentimes, the child is the one who suffers, because it doesn't matter if someone has a bad track record or whatnot, as long as, they have a beating heart basically and says, "I wanna be a parent," the court acknowledges that. Um, and it leaves a lot of kids, you know, suffering. And that's definitely the case in my case.
So were you suffering with both of your parents by being in either home, or was one place better than the other, or did it just go back and forth?
So, there was definitely a different environment. So when I was with my mom, it was very much indoctrinating us against my father. Like, "Your father's no good. Your father left you at the age of 4 to, to go be with his new girlfriend and took all of the money," and, you know, yet again, I'm, like, still a kid, and y so and he never said anything bad about my mom. He was like, I wanted you to make your own judgment as you grew up about your mom, and I didn't want my opinions about your mother reflect on that." And so, like, he never bashed my mom. He, always was very loving, would read us, bedtime stories and, books, and I just, like, felt, that nice hug you get from being loved, and, we would go on the weekends to visit my grandparents in Smith Mountain Lake, um, that, I didn't really get to see often because the family was just split, and, like, I loved my grandma to death. Like, we would wake up at 6 o'clock in the morning every day on the weekends and bake a cake, and that was her thing to do, and, I loved baking, and, I didn't get to do that with my mom. She was too busy, and so, um, yeah, it was very much when I was with my father, what do the kids need? And when I was with my mother, it was, what do I need?
So that's a very big distinction, and that is one of the things that I think neglect is often, um, narcissism, in the way that the parent
Yes.
neglects the child because they're too busy, they're too worried about themselves, and when there is no balance, a child doesn't have any way. I mean, you're 7 years old, you don't have any way of knowing what is okay. All you know is that you feel abandoned, that you feel scared all the time, that you're walking around on eggshells or what you called unexploded bombs
Yes.
in your mother's house with your stepfather.
And I do wanna point out that, like, my mom would use the court, like, saying, like, "You should be grateful for me because I protected you from your father. Like, I spent all this money on you." And I'm like, "I never asked for that." I'm like, "You brought me in the world. I never asked to be brought in the world. I'm your responsibility." So she would always, you know, use that against us. Like, "I did so much for you. I fought for you. I spent all this money on you to protect you from your father." And, yeah, it was my father ended up having to file bankruptcy and go into his 401k because he was trying, to fight for us, but, he just didn't have the resources like my mom did.
So the system, that failed you in this way continued in a different kind of a turn of events at age 7 when you were starting puberty, very young.
Yes. Um, I started
And a
TV at
different
the
system
yeah.
actually began to fail you, a different whole system of, our anyway, yes, please go ahead and tell us about that
Yes.
unusual occurrence and how that was handled.
So the condition I had was early pubercoccus syndrome, where I started puberty early, and it's very quite rare. It doesn't really happen. So, I started at the age of 7. I was never put on hormone blockers. In a way, I was set up almost to fail. The average boy starts puberty around 11. So I started it 4 years early than the average age of a typical boy starts. And so everything for me was just accelerated. And, I started growing, I had leg hair by the age of 8. I was growing, pubic hair out of like, 9. My voice was getting deep at the age of like, you know, 12. Like I was, having voice cracks in, 5th grade. Um, so like everything for me was just sped up. And I really never got a childhood because it was so short-lived. And, if I would like to also mention, if I ever like misbehaved, my mom would tell my doctor, David's misbehaving. And so my medicine or my pills would be adjusted. And I was at a very high dose of SSRI medication at a young age, and on, stimulants. And, I talked to my therapist. Now I was like, my brain never got to develop without stimulants and SSRI medication. Like I've been on that since the age of 7. Um, and so like for a little while, I didn't even have a personality because of the medication. It was almost like taking poison. Like I like couldn't cry because I was told not to, and I physically couldn't cry because of the pills. Um, I just felt like a robot for like 8 years of my life where like I just felt like no emotion. And so,
And you're
yeah.
at this tender age going through puberty, no hormone blockers. You know, how did the kids at school treat you? Did they notice? Did they make fun of you? Was it, how was it in your home? What's mom and stepdad saying to their 7-year-old, 8-year-old that's in puberty?
So like I never really got made fun of for that in school. There was other things that I did get made fun of for like, being gay, for instance. But
Yeah. Did you
my
know that immediately? Did you have that language at that young age? Did you know, or did that come later?
I knew I liked boys, I would say around the age I liked men, the same gender around the age of say 5, 6. Um, I never really, had feeling towards girls. Um, and so like that even showed in elementary school for me. Like I would have crushes on, you know, guys and
Wait,
other boys, never acted on anything, but it's
right.
yeah. Um, so I did have that.
Had you talked about that to anyone at that age, or did you just hide that?
I had
Because
that.
people
Um,
yeah, it
because
seems like that
yeah,
would be the natural thing to do when you're already scared at home.
I just didn't really think it was relevant. Um, I just again, I just kept quiet, for a lot of my life. I wasn't able to articulate the feelings I had, um, about anything. Um, I had to teach myself a lot about grooming and because my stepfather wouldn't show me that. Like, my mom would tell my stepfather, like, "David, you know, needs help with, grooming," like and he's like, "What do you want me to do?" Like and so she had to teach me some stuff, and she didn't know what to do because she's not a man. So, like, I very much had to teach myself, you know, how to be, you know, a boy and take care of myself as a man because I didn't get that.
Yeah, but you're in, like, 3rd, 4th, 5th grade.
Exactly. Exactly.
Yeah. I
Yeah.
don't even know how you would know how to do most anything at that age, and then to be going through puberty and not understanding what your body's doing and having no one to talk to, that's pretty traumatic, right? That in and of itself. But then something else happened with your father, your biological father, your
Yeah.
dad.
Um, so I remember if it was, we went to go see this movie, Octoman. It just came out, and we were coming back from the movie theaters, and, uh, he says his goodbyes, and we go our separate ways, and my mom gets a phone call, and I could tell by the tone of her voice it wasn't good, and so I was in the other room, and she was in the kitchen, and she called me and my sister down and told us flat out, "Your father's been arrested for wanting to kill the new family he just married into, and for having, you 2 on his list." And as someone in the 3rd grade, I was just, like, completely numb. I developed severe major depression. I would cry, randomly during recess, during karate, during, swim practice, and, like, my coaches had to calm me down. And, I would go to the back and, like, just talk to them like I am, like, dying. And I remember we were having, like, this, creative session in 3rd grade, and I just draw my father a picture of jail bars, my father behind it, and point the teacher, "That's where my father is." And, like, I don't understand how someone could tell a child that at that young age. It wasn't age appropriate at all.
To tell their child that your father had a hit list for his new family and for you and your older sister,
Yes.
that you were on his hit list, basically. She
Yes.
may not use those words, but that's what she said.
Yes.
So you're in huge trauma over
Yes.
this because the one person where you felt cared for and loved was your father and his side of the family, your grandmother and grandfather, uncle, you had said, and that basically all of those relationships ended in what was it, 4th grade?
Yeah,
You've been arrested.
yeah, um, so I barely got to see my cousin and my uncle and, my aunt on my dad's side, and after the arrest, that became very much less and less. Um, I remember my dad told me, um, that my mom told my grandparents, "David has grandparents, he doesn't need you." And, um, that never sat well with my grandma at all. And, it took 10 years later, I just now saw my grandma for the first time in a decade, um, which I'll get to in a minute, but, like, I talked to her and she told me she knew something was going on in the house, but she didn't know how bad it was. And, I asked her why, and she said, "Well, it was time to go back to your house, and your mom always hated when your father even was a minute late, and would use that against him. And so your father would always be very punctual, um, and you started balling up in the chair, almost like you were trying to sink in it, and say, like, 'I don't wanna go back. I don't wanna go back. Don't take me back.'" And she told me, "I just thought, it was a kid not like leave grandma's." And my sister comes and says, "It's okay, David. Mom still loves you." And my grandma just, like, was like, "What the heck?" Like, this is something a lot larger than a kid not wanting to leave grandma's, and I vaguely remember that. There's a lot of memories I have that I just dissociated, and I just lost part of my life in a dissociated state. Um, but my grandfather started getting really sick, and we were told that we need to go see him because, we don't know how much longer he's gonna live. So we went down, to North Carolina and met him, and We say our goodbyes. I didn't even know I was saying goodbye. I was just like, "Oh, we're gonna go see grandma." I was like, "Can't wait to see grandma. I haven't seen her in so long." Like, everything was good, but, my cousins were there, um, um, my dad's side, and, um, we had a good time. I don't remember if my mom or stepfather was there. I don't know if they left or if they're all then, but, um, yeah, I that was the last time I saw my grandparents and my cousins until this past Christmas. Um, yeah,
So now as an adult, you have been able to reconnect with
yes,
them. Okay, that's wonderful. I'm happy to hear that. That's, a lot of loss in your young life to then be disconnected from them, and that was around 4th grade, you had told me, and so when you look back on that type of abuse in your life, I consider that kind of all forms of abuse. You had the neglect, so you had the emotional abuse, you had the mental hardship because of never being good enough, never doing the right things, always being told that you were, you know, um, not worth it, and then being told what I believe were lies about your father.
yes,
I
I did,
don't
yeah,
Yeah. Can you tell
it's
me when you found out that that was not true, that there was no hit list
yeah.
with his
So, I would say it was last Christmas, so it was Christmas of can't keep track of the years anymore, but, uh, last year, so I think Christmas of 2022, um,
Mhm.
he sits me down and, he comes over, to my apartment in Richmond, Virginia, and, we say goodbye, and he just, like, says, "David, there's some things I need to tell you because I can't keep living without you knowing these things." I was like at this time, I resented my father. I did not like him. I thought he was annoying. Of course, all this was because of the things I was told, and, he basically
Felt
yeah,
abandoned,
yes,
all those things.
all those things, and he told me what basically I was told my whole life is a lie, and for anyone to hear that is a huge thing to hear. Um, I was told, that I was told that he was never put on a hit list. He never had a hit list. He never hired a hitman to kill us. What happened was he had too many drinks at the bar, and his friend, was a private investigator and had a body cam on him and was recording the conversation, um, and was, edging, almost baiting him. He was in this new marriage, with his wife named Tracy and their kids, and he was having their problems. And, apparently there was this friend of Tracy's and called Tina, and he said, "I really wish Tina was just dead." And because he said he felt like it was a threesome in that relationship that, anytime he tried to talk to his wife, his wife always had to consult Tina, and then Tina would consult him, and so, like, he just wanted her dead. And I believed it because I know my father, and that he's not someone who can lie, um, and the way he said it was very like, you almost can tell when someone's trying to, like, dupe you sometimes, and I was like, "He's not trying to do that." Um, and, you know, it made a lot more sense, than your father was trying to put you on a hit list. So I was like, "Why is this loving man trying to kill me?" Um, which made no sense at all. But he was put in federal prison with a bunch of, serial killers and rapists and the worst, and, for 3 months. Of course, I was told, "David, your father got out for good behavior, and I'm terrified. I'm like, "He's out? Like, am I in danger? Like, what? Like, what do you mean he's out in 3 months?" And so, like, I was scared out of my mind that this person was gonna kill me. Um, so yeah, it was definitely a big revelation, and I talked to my cousin, whose also name is Jane, not Jan, and she was, she worked for law enforcement, and she worked with this case and was like she told me every detail and was like, "That never happened." And so, like, hearing it from someone else, I was like, "Okay, like, you know, people don't share the same brains." And so, like, I was like, "Okay." The more probable thing was my mom was just making all this up. And so, yeah, that day, I basically had, like, a midlife crisis, and it was like, "What the hell?" Um,
And so this is just this past December.
yes.
So a midlife crisis, you're not at midlife yet.
So
So you've lived a lot of life through these various abuses, also
yes,
suffering from physical abuse, emotional abuse, and then moving into the next part of your story in your adolescent life, having really no support from either of your sisters, your stepsister or your biological older sister, who you said terrorized you quite a bit as well
yes,
and was very much like your mother.
yes. I believe, she was trying to deal with the pain in her own way. I feel like she was self-regulating by taking it out on me. But my sisters, I never felt safe at home unless my mom was there. And, my mom would go out, occasionally to like, have her own social life. And like they would always terrorize me, chase me around the house, like do just awful, mean things you could do to someone and say mean things, make fun of me. Um, just and I would, almost every time lock myself in the bathroom and call mom and be like, "Please come home." Like, crying in tears, like, "I don't feel safe." I did not feel safe at all. I didn't even feel safe with my stepfather home and my mom was gone. Like, my mom went to
Right.
New York once for, a teacher trip, so my mom's a teacher, and, um, she was gone for a week to New York City, and that whole time, I was just, like, in this constant state of fear, like, she's not here to protect me. And even though she was abusing me, like, it almost was like me like, she was my safety raft almost, even though she was the one who was abusing me.
Right. So it's very much what makes this so complicated, this kind of abuse when it's your, primary caregivers,
Yes.
mother, stepfather, biological father who loved you but is absent, mom who's a narcissist but still the one you would turn to protect you. It's it, it's that complex way of trying to find a safe space, a safe person, somebody who would stick up for you, but always having that come up short. And so as you're moving into your adolescent life, having started puberty, you're looking for someone, to love you for real, where it doesn't come and go, where it isn't neglect and then, let's cuddle in bed for hours on end. And oh, now I'm
Yeah.
going to discard you because stepdad's home and sisters who are going to terrorize you until you've locked yourself in the bathroom crying and trying to call mom. And all the people around you failing you in some way or another,
Yeah.
um, provide that sense of safety. What happened in adolescence for you?
So, um, it kind of all started, um, I was in about the 6th grade, and I was 13, and, what happened was what happened was my mom introduced me to sex, and the fact that we watched this R movie that had sex scenes in it, I didn't know what sex was. I get curious because 'cause I've always been a curious person, that's just my personality, so I Google what a sex tape is, and then I just have all these pornos pop up, and I'm like, "Whoa, like, what's this?" And it just morphed, and I went on, online websites, and I started talking to, men, and I met someone who was close by who lived in my neighborhood, and, we talked for about 3 weeks, um, and we had this
So
I
let's see.
he was 39.
So 39, you were 13, he was 39.
Yes.
So there's that new Demi Lovato song.
Yes.
What's
I actually just yeah,
30?
am a singer-songwriter, and I've rewritten that song to my story. So, yes, it's ironic you bring that part up, but yes, 1339 is what I call it. Um, but, he we
So the grooming has taken place over the
yeah,
internet for a period of time, and then face to face, you find out you didn't know this person in your neighborhood. You just found out that he was close by, or you knew who it was.
I didn't we had no prior relations at all. Uh,
Okay.
I it just happened to be that he lived in the neighborhood, and, um
Wow, that's really interesting.
yes,
Really unfortunate, but at the same time, you're looking for somebody to see you, to hear
yes.
you, to love you. So of course you're very, very vulnerable. And after 3 weeks,
He, um he is like, "Hey, how about we meet in person?" And, you know, for a while, I shamed myself for a while because I had a part in this too, but I'm like, I didn't even have the language for what was even going around me, and this was a 39-year-old person who should have known better, but had this
absolutely.
sick, perverted fantasy of having sex with boys, and so, he picks me up one night at midnight when everyone's asleep. I sneak out, and, I thought, we were just gonna in my mind, I thought we were just gonna talk, play games or whatnot, I don't know, but, I thought we weren't gonna do what was going to happen, and so, um, on this, we get to his house, I just feel the seatbelt tighten up because he puts his hand on my thigh, and I am like, "What? What's going on here?" I thought this person, was going, be nice to me, and, um we get to his house, we go in the living room, and we talk for a bit. He starts taking my clothes off, and he takes me to his bed where he continues to rape me. Um, and it hurt so bad. It felt like hours, even though it was probably 20 minutes. And I felt completely disgusted in myself. He asked if he could, pleasure me, and I wanted to get the hell out of there, and I was like, "No," and at this point, even before we go to his bed, I am visibly shaking as if, it's 30 degrees out, shaking, like a leaf, and it's pretty obvious I'm in distress, and he has sex with me anyway, and
And you're 13, he's
39.
39. You hold no responsibility for what happened, but of course, that's, what's manipulated is for you to feel shame and like somehow it was your fault. And all of those things is what, that's the outcome. And you've been in puberty since age 7. You're 13. You're 6 years into puberty
Yes.
without really knowing what sex is until you're kind of with your mom watching a rated R movie and then look up what is a sex tape from the movie. So no one's talked to you about all of that. They know you that you're in puberty, but nobody ever has any conversation with you.
Yeah.
You're totally left on your own. This is why parents have to, well, good parents, which I wish there were more of those because I hear these stories over and over how they fail to communicate, love because they're too busy or they're abusive. And then you're left on your own to figure out what is sex. And of course, you're going online, porn is popping up, and now you're with a 39-year-old who's going to take advantage of you. And of course, we'll make sure that you're the one that feels guilty and like it was your fault. And you will just naturally fall into the cycle of shame
Yes.
that happens when this happens to a young person. So even though you're going through puberty, it does not mean that there was any form of consent. You're underage for the first and foremost, but
Yes.
you're also way underage in education and you don't know. And that's where I just so want people who have been victimized by older adults to know they had no part in that abuse happening. There is one person responsible for that, and that is the older adult who took advantage of a 13-year-old boy who didn't know anything
And at
and
this
was looking
point,
for love in all the wrong places, I guess, and
yes,
didn't know it was gonna end up with sex and being, raped. You were
yeah,
raped.
yes. And at this point, you know, even before, like, what led up was a perfect storm of events because I was completely devoid of love. I was dying on the inside. It felt like my insides were on fire. If the pain at times was worse than breaking bone. And I lived like that for 7 years. And so I'm in this pain.
What happened in those 7 years? You've
Yeah.
got to, tell us what happened after this first experience with this online predator who happened to then live in your neighborhood, who you met up with, who then undressed you, raped you for the first time.
Yes. So like again, I'm devoid of love. I'm having these urges and these thoughts. I don't know how to I didn't have the language for them at 13, 14-year-old mindset. I like to also add I'm heavily grieving. My grandfather just passed away on my mom's side, and he died on December 19th, a couple days before Christmas. And I was not alive at that point. I was completely acting in survival mode. What do I need to get through minute by minute, day by day? I was having crying spells left and right. I was suicidal for about 5 years. I was highly suicidal. And he
This is starting at the
age
when
of
you were
13.
13, grandpa had died in
Yes.
December, and then for the next 5 years, suicidal
Yes.
ideation constantly.
Yes. And so what happens is this man who is 39 and I'm 13, he introduces me to his friend who then have sex with me. This goes on for 5 years.
Or
Um,
traffic.
yes, I was sex trafficked, and I I we would go to these motels. They would pick me up, hours of the night, 12 o'clock, 1 o'clock, and we would have sex for 4 hours straight. And sometimes there was this one time it lasted till 8 in the morning. So, and this happened about 3 times a week.
I am so sorry, and this is that same predator, that same online predator who happened to you found out lived in your neighborhood, you met up with, trying to feel safe, trying to feel special. He made you feel that way, special,
Yes,
like he loved you, and then he raped you, and then he allowed his friends to take you to hotels
yes,
and rape you for 7, 8 hours at a time.
yes, that's correct. And then they would introduce me to their friends. So there were times even I lived in Chesterfield, Virginia, and they would take me to Richmond, Virginia, which is about 40 minutes away from my house. And I don't know where I am. I'm scared out of my mind. having sex with people twice my age. I think the oldest guy I had sex with was 61 years old, and I it came to a point where I was just numb. I I stopped feeling pain, and I would every time I was raped, I would dissociate into a third world I created for myself, and, like, I was back at home playing video games, or I was, watching a cartoon while my naked body is being penetrated from behind, and, uh, you know, but it's so twisted because, I was looking for love so badly that eventually it started feeling good, that, you know, I wanted love at, this age. I put 2 and 2 together. I'm like, "You know what? Like, people who love each other have sex." That's what you see. Your parents have they have sex. People in relationships, they have sex, so they must love me. So, it messed me up a lot, um, and completely has skewed the way I look at the world, um, and there are parts of me that I will never get back, ever, and I lost my childhood. I lost my innocence to abuse, to predators. Um, I don't feel safe in this world even to this day. I have to be brave every day, get out of bed, and go into the world even though my body's telling me not to, and having to fight that urge of just wanting to stay at home and do nothing. Um, it's still very much there. I struggled making friends. Um, and at the same time, like, I'm still being abused by my mom and by my father. So, like, I was what they called husky growing up, and I overate to, 1, I'm a kid, so we don't really have off switch when it comes to sweets, and 2, like, I'm pretty sure I was coping, and I would just stuff my face with food, with sweets.
So after that first rape
Yep,
and during the time when he then, escalated everything to his friends and you're being raped while you're watching cartoons
yep,
and then you're saying and then at some point it started to feel like, well, this feels good because it's at least a relationship. These people must love me.
yes,
Well, I want to continue this conversation in a part two. And I want to first and foremost let you know how sad and how sorry I am and how outraged I get when you spent, your entire childhood being scared, being unsafe, having that reinforced by the people in your life, not being given the love that you needed so that you could develop naturally and normally, and then starting puberty at age 7 and then going into this online world where someone in your neighborhood took advantage of you. It's just unbelievable, and I'm so, so sorry. So I wanna pick this back up and talk about what some of the outcomes were. First of all, there was this eating disorder that you're starting to talk about. Let's get into part 2, and we'll pick up your life at about age 14. Would that be okay with you, David?
yes.
Okay. Thank you so much for being here and sharing this so honestly.